Back to Brian's Beat.
King Kong, you know the name of King Kong. You know the fame of King Kong. 10 times as big as a man. One day a boy too young to know the danger made a friend of this giant fearsome stranger. And the life they led on their island home became a legend, the legend of King Kong. You know the name of King Kong. You know the fame of King Kong. 10 times as big as a man.
Welcome back to Brian's Beat, hour number 2. We have a couple of guests coming up in just a bit. We'll hear from Dr. June Saba McGuire. She is the superintendent of schools in the town of Dartmouth. And Chris Cotter, who is a member of the New Bedford School Committee, is going to join us a little later on during this hour. We will take your calls in just a bit. In Fairhaven, 44 degrees. I look outside the window and I'm thinking, doesn't look like it's 44, but apparently it is. 44 degrees, 41 in Berkeley, and in New Bedford, 45 degrees. SouthCoast Towing, if you're listening on the WBSM app and you know you downloaded it for free and everything that you hear you're getting courtesy of not only us, but SouthCoast Towing. So SouthCoast Towing, thank you very much for bringing us the app. All right, let's take a quick one. 508-996-0500. Hello.
Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Brian.
Anyway, what do you think about the pick of Robert Kennedy?
I'm not surprised. I'm not impressed. I am surprised that he was chosen for Health and Human Services Secretary. But after the way that the Senate went so heavy Republican, I guess I'm not that much.
Well, I think it was very political myself.
Oh, it all is, yes.
I know, but they say it isn't. They deny that, you know what I mean? But of course it is. You know, because he stood up for Trump and everything else. So it's the old story.
It is. I mean? You're absolutely right. It is. It's a song and dance.
Who had that position for the last?
Who has it right now? You mean?
No, yeah.
I have no idea. I really don't. I don't remember.
I don't know either, but I don't know about autism, the vaccines. I don't know. I don't take them myself, but I mean, when you're young, little children, I'm wondering about that, if it's good or bad. I didn't do enough investigation on it. We all had them when we were kids, you know, but I still got the mumps. I got the measles.
There you go.
I got the measles. I got the mumps. I got chicken pox. My sister got scarlet fever. We had to take pills, so we didn't get it. I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. But when you're little, you do what your mother says.
There's a difference between what mom and dad say compared to what the government says.
Yeah, well, you had to get them then for school. I don't know how it is now about COVID.
So, that is what you have been led to believe. You got to get them for school. They try to twist your arm into believing that. Fact of the matter is, you can claim religious exemption there, and there are other exemptions, and there are also other schools that you can go to where you don't have to worry about that outside of the system. People just don't want to look.
And the other thing is, he thinks that it causes autism. Now, that's not really proven. It's a question mark still.
I think it is. But, here's the one thing that RFK Jr. has going for him. He is an attorney and he has fought many medical malpractice type suits and won them. So he is, he's got a team of people, and they've looked over a lot of this science, and they've been able to win cases in court. And that's why he's got such a great push in this direction. Here's the bad thing, and my guess is he knows this already. He's not going to be able to fight any of these cases anymore because, once he becomes Health and Human Services Secretary, and then he tries to defend either a medical company or an individual in a class action suit, or an individual or a class action suit, those attorneys will be all over him like wolves.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what else I was going to say.
I don't know. Make it quick. I got a guest coming up.
I know. I'm getting one of those, can't remember. All right.
I have plenty of those. Don't worry about it.
Have a good day.
You too. I thank you much for your
Thank
call.
you.
508-996-0500. So, speaking of Donald Trump, and it kind of meshes into a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about over this hour. Donald Trump wants to end wokeness in education. He has vowed to use federal money as leverage. This is a Colin Binky story out of the Associated Press. The president-elect wants to keep transgender athletes out of girls' sports. A lot of people do. He wants to forbid classroom lessons on gender identity and structural racism. Not quite sure what structural racism is, but if my mind's eye is correct, a lot of people feel the same way, including yours truly. He wants to abolish diversity and inclusion offices. Okay. Then here in the Commonwealth, okay, so you've got that piece of info right there. Then, of course, we had the election. It'll be 2 weeks in a few days. And folks here in the Commonwealth overwhelmingly said no to yes to MCAS as a graduation requirement. Well, the day before the election, the Dartmouth School Committee held their meeting. And before, and I'm not in anybody's head here, but before they knew what the election result would be on that question, they decided that they were somehow going to keep MCAS around. What does that mean? I really don't know. And so I reached out to Dartmouth Schools. Kate, has always been good at making sure that the superintendent, whomever that person might be, would come on to this program. So when we come back, Dr. June Saba McGuire, she's going to try to piece all of this together as best she knows on Brian's Beat. And welcome back to Brian's Beat. Whew. What? A big, I guess that's the best way of saying it, just a big sea change between the question to vote, what the Trump administration plans for education. We're gonna talk about it during this hour. In a little bit, we'll have Chris Cotter from the New Bedford School Committee joining us. But right now, and it's first time, Dr. June Saba McGuire, Superintendent of Dartmouth Schools, joining us on the program today. And a very, very good morning to you. How are you? Let's try it like this then. Good morning, and how are you?
Good morning. How are you? Thanks so much for inviting me.
Well, I'm glad to have you. As I'd like to say, I'm doing better than I should be.
I appreciate that sentiment.
Well, good. There are a lot of folks, including yours truly. When I picked up the Dartmouth Weekly this week as a Dartmouth resident, and I saw the story front page about the school committee has decided that they want to keep the MCAS, and it didn't really explain in what fashion. So I thought, well, let's hear from you and let you at least tell us. So good morning, and let's just start right in. Let's get down and dirty.
So I think what you're referring to as far as the school committee was their vote supporting the resolutions that MASC, the Mass Association for School Committee, consider on a yearly basis as far as legislation that they're going to support. I believe that's what you're referring to. As far as like the school committee voting or supporting the continued use of MCAS, right now we're still awaiting guidance from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education as to the future administration of MCAS. Right now, the MCAS, as you know, hasn't actually gone away. What the voters have decided on is that MCAS will not be used as a competency determination for high school graduation. So as of right now, and until we get further guidance that we're still awaiting from DESE, or the Department of Education, we're still administering the MCAS.
So that's stated in just looking at the 10th graders, because this is what the question basically pertained to. Let's say, when does that testing begin? Is it separate for the 10th graders, or do all the different grades take it at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are different timelines. There are sort of like there are timelines from that the department puts out guidance where you're supposed to administer the MCAS, but they're not particular dates except when you get to high school. But we start administering the MCAS when students are in grade 3. So grades 3 through 10 take some form of the MCAS test. It's just that when students are in grade 10, the test, the results of the assessment are part of what students need to pass or needed to pass in order to receive a high school diploma in Massachusetts.
Okay, so are the students already studying, the 10th grade students I'm talking about, are they already studying for what would be the MCAS whenever it's to be taken?
I mean, I wouldn't say they're studying for the MCAS. I would say that they're studying that the standards that teachers are teaching students are aligned with the MCAS assessment itself. So you can't necessarily study for the MCAS because the MCAS is an assessment of student progress toward meeting the Massachusetts state standards.
So we hear teachers, I used to live a couple of doors down from one of the Dartmouth teachers, and I would constantly hear that the teachers are teaching to the test. How do you align them teaching to the test to your past statement?
I've heard that as well. I certainly did hear that during some of what the ads were in support of eliminating the MCAS as a graduation requirement. But what I would say is that there's not a way to teach to the MCAS test. The assessment, the MCAS assessment itself, is an assessment of student progress toward meeting the state standards. I think some of what happened, especially early on, and I'm sure this persists, is that in some ways we do give what we call practice tests, right? And so when we're giving practice tests, I'm sure that very much feels like to teachers, to students, to families that we're teaching to a certain test. And I think that that's a practice that maybe has gotten in the way of what the MCAS really is supposed to measure, and that really is student progress toward meeting state standards.
We're talking to Dr. June Saba McGuire. She is the superintendent of schools in the town of Dartmouth. I guess where I'm coming from, and I've heard, if this was only me, I would say it's Brian losing his brain again. But you've got 10th graders right now, and parents of 10th graders, in particular those that voted to stop it as a graduation requirement, and they're thinking that their son, daughter won't be taking some assessment come whatever date in the spring that they would be taking this exam. What's going to happen to them?
Well, I think that's a great question. And again, we're waiting for guidance from the Department of Ed. But as of right now, we are still planning to administer the MCAS as a way, again, to measure our students' progress. And that's one way for us as a school district, in any school district in Massachusetts, to assess student progress toward meeting the MCAS, toward meeting the standards. And so it's one measure of student progress. And that's something that I've talked about a lot, and certainly many of my colleagues, is the MCAS is one measure of student progress. And it's an important measure, but it's not the only measure. It's not the sole measure, and nor should it be. And I think that's what we need to reconsider, and something that, being part of MASS, which is the Mass Association for School Superintendents, that leadership has put forward and wanted to, and continues to support reconsidering the way that MCAS is being used, particularly in relation to student graduation. And I met with a group of students yesterday. I meet with them monthly, high school students, and we had conversation about MCAS and their feelings about it being used as a competency determination. And I could see that for some of them there was relief that was no longer something that they had to worry about. And yet most of them, or a good number of them that I was sitting with and having conversation with, had already passed the MCAS.
Yeah, I most students, certainly in Dartmouth, most students pass MCAS, or at least are proficient.
Yes, but they did share the stress that comes along with that.
Sure, and I get it, and I think that's one of the reasons why it went down in such depending on what you're calling going down. But the reason why most voters said, no, it's time to end this. I've been on its warpath for more than 25 years, since the Ed Reform Act of 1993 was passed. I have this vision, and see if you see what I see here. When would the 10th grade test next come around?
In the spring.
Okay. So we're coming up to that test date. What if, since it's no longer a graduation requirement, your 10th graders do not want to take that test?
Well, that does happen, right? So we do at times. It's not something that you see frequently, but we have had families who have opted their students out of taking the assessment.
Yeah, but not like you might see this time around.
Well, that's right. That's something we do have to consider. I think that's a great perspective and something for us to think about.
So here's what I'm wondering. Would it be an unexcused absence? Would it be an excused absence if they didn't come to school? Because it's my understanding, and I could be wrong, that when it's an MCAS day, that's what students are doing.
I think that is true. I think that I think that's one of the challenges with administering MCAS, is that in many ways it does obviously alter the typical school day, and it takes a lot of time and effort on behalf of school leaders and teachers, students, support staff to be able to have the conditions in place for students to take that assessment. our technology staff. I mean, because the MCAS is technology-based now, it's a computer-based test. So those are things that we have to consider. I don't have an answer for that right now, but I appreciate that perspective, and it's something for us to be thinking about.
Oh, I think not only you, but your colleagues in New Bedford and Westport, all of them throughout the Commonwealth. This is a sea change. There is a movement underfoot up on Beacon Hill with the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education to try to, to do an end around on what the voters have passed. So yeah, I understand your position because you're the superintendent. You're waiting to hear what DESE says. And then, of course, you've got the parents and the students and teachers. You're getting it from both ends. It's kind of like being a sergeant in the military.
Yeah, I like to think of myself as a teacher and think about it through the lens of an educator. And, you talked about, how long MCAS has been in place, because I can certainly remember when it wasn't a requirement. I was in the classroom when we were first giving the practice test for MCAS, and remember how that felt as an educator, especially when we were giving the practice test. I remember giving it to my fifth graders at the time and are administering it and watching sort of some of the struggles that they were having. At the time I was in Brockton. And, in communities like that, it feels a little different than it does in communities like Dartmouth.
I bet. Look, yeah. I've kept you longer than I asked. I bet Kate is sitting there saying, you said 10 minutes, you said 10 minutes. But I've got one more question, if you don't mind, and not MCAS related, but certainly education related. And as a Dartmouth resident, you and I both know this goes on. President-elect Trump says he wants to end wokeness in education. Here is a direct quote. I can only imagine what you're thinking, but you'll let us know. Any school pushing critical race theory, transgender insanity, and other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content on our children will not get campaign funds. And he will not give 1 penny to schools with vaccine or mask mandates. Your response?
Well, my response is that we don't teach critical race theory in schools. We've never taught critical race theory. Critical race theory is a researcher's lens to study some societal aspect of the influence of race on society. And we don't teach that in schools. We never have. So political wokeness isn't something that I've ever seen being taught in our schools.
What about the transgender? I don't know about the insanity, but there's a lot of school is different than when you and I went to school. And there is a lot of transgender groups and LGBT plus stuff that goes on within our schools.
And we certainly have students in our schools who are LBQT. We have students who are transgender. And what we teach in schools is to be accepting of all students. And, we use words like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as if they're not real. And those are things that we are striving for in our schools, so that no matter, all students should have a sense of belonging in our schools. And that's something that we in Dartmouth certainly strive to ensure that all our students feel that sense of inclusivity and belonging. We don't teach it. But
I hear that, and there isn't one student from 12th grade all the way down to kindergarten that hasn't been brought up within the Dartmouth system that hasn't gone through what you are expressing right now. That is what Donald Trump says. You bring in the DEI, you won't get any money.
Well, we certainly support diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and we also depend on federal funds to help support our schools. And so taking federal funds away from schools, regardless of what community you're in the end is going to hurt the children who attend the public schools.
I got you on that. Dr. Saba McGuire, thank you so much. I didn't mean to throw the curveball at you, but, this came down and I said, deals with my town, deals with all of these communities around here. And I just wanted to get your opinion on it. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and you have a great day.
You too. Dr. June Saba McGuire, Superintendent of Dartmouth Schools, joining us on Brian's Beat today. Glad to have her here. Wow. So I do know my feelings about DEI and a lot of the transgenderism. I think that what people believe is called critical race theory, its term, critical race theory, means something different than what you are believing. I'm not trying to say what you are thinking is CRT isn't happening in schools, but critical race theory is a college-based research tool. Does it mean that something that seems like critical race theory is not happening in the schools? Absolutely. Oh, yeah. And I believe it definitely is. But part of the catch here is when you use that term, the other side gets to say, no, we're not doing this is what critical race theory is. Doesn't mean that they're not doing something that is synonymous with critical race theory. All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, try to figure out what the plan moving forward is for New Bedford schools with Chris Cotter of the New Bedford School Committee on Brian's Beat. And his name is Chris Cotter, school committee member in New Bedford, also a police officer. Glad to have him joining us on Brian's Beat today. Cop Cotter, committee man Cotter. Well, today it's committee man Cotter. How you doing?
Good morning, Brian. How are you?
If I were doing any better, there'd be three of me. Plain and simple. Plain and simple.
Itself would be scary.
One's bad enough.
I know.
That's what I've been told anyway. So the vote almost 2 weeks ago, folks in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts decided that MCAS should no longer be a graduation requirement. How is that sitting? You must have a school committee meeting coming up pretty soon, or maybe you already had one.
Well, we had one the day before the election, so no, we'll have our meeting coming up in December. So will that be on the agenda? Most likely, I'm sure it'll be a topic of discussion. But at this point, I haven't seen any agenda, but I'm sure that we'll discuss it.
Nobody discussed it the day before the election?
No, we never preempt for anything.
Really? Well, it's interesting because it seems that Dartmouth has. And I heard the superintendent, but I'm reading here from Dartmouth Weekly. Nearly 60% of Massachusetts and Dartmouth voters favor ending the MCAS graduation requirement, but the school committee says the test will continue to be administered in town. Now, exactly what that means, well, the chair of the school committee says, we're holding our own. You tell me.
Well, in my opinion, I will agree with the premise and the way that the question was written, that it should be eliminated as a graduation requirement. But, the bottom line here is that we do need to assess students' level of education and see if they're on track to be at that grade level. And unfortunately, right now, whether it's good or bad, the MCAS test is the state standard test to measure that level. Now, the great thing is that it's no longer something that's being held against the student if they don't pass it at a certain grade level, or not a grade level, but a certain level where it's going to be held against them for getting their diploma.
Isn't that a contradiction? I mean, if you are measuring a child, but you can't use it as a graduation requirement, what are you really measuring?
Well, I mean, growing up, I mean, you included, we all had our standardized testing to measure our level that we were learning at. And it helps the teachers and schools determine where their strategies might be focused on getting those students up to a level that they should be at that age.
We did, but we had separate tests, and superintendents and principals could make the judgment call on whether you were teaching well, whether they needed to fine-tune or go to another testing company for a test. We didn't have a statewide assessment the way that we do now. And I would say it like this. I look at you, you turned out pretty darn well. I look at myself, so I'm a piece of dirt. But, be that as it may, I'm still managing, and most the baby boomers managed. We may have screwed up the country, but we screwed it up pretty darn well.
Well, and I'll be honest with you. I mean, as far as the testing when I was growing up, I mean, I was not a strong test taker. So, I mean, my level, in my opinion, looking at it as an adult to when I took the tests, may not have been as strong as they may have measured, or I may have been stronger than what the test may have measured, because, again, testing for me was not a strong point. So whether it was a state standard, a federal standard, whatever that standardized testing was that we used back then, it still helped the schools determine, where students' levels are. I think one of the advantages is that when you take the MCAS requirement away, I think it hopefully, and I say hopefully because I don't have any say in the curriculum and how things are being taught as a school committee member, but I do hope that it brings back more autonomy in the classroom for teachers, where they can now teach to that level and teach to those students instead of teaching to what I determine as teaching to a test.
Well, it's interesting because I asked Dr. Saba McGuire about that, and she said you really can't teach MCAS. It sounded like it's all meshed within the curriculum. So what do you do then? I mean, how do you can't extract it, and yet it's no longer a measurement.
Well, you're right. You can't extract it, but again, you have focused curriculum content. Let's get back to the basics and stop worrying about teaching to a level where students have to meet and score a grade in order to get their diploma. I think it's a measurement we need to have in place. Was Massachusetts prepared to see this pass with such a huge number? Probably not. Because again, I don't think they were prepared for anything, because we've had no, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I'm told, we've had no guidance from DESE on a school committee level to see what their next plan is. So
I get this from WCVB.com. Insiders weigh replacement standard after MCAS vote. Voters overwhelmingly cast their ballots to eliminate the requirement that high school students pass the MCAS exam in order to receive a diploma. But now a new statewide standard is being contemplated. And
with what you just said, I personally, I think I have a little bit of a problem with what you're saying, or what they're saying, because if that's the case, then of course we were teaching to a test.
Won't argue that.
Because again, if you're saying that, well, we need to come up with a new standard that's going to be equivalent to MCAS, if MCAS was the go all be all outside of a requirement, take the graduation requirement away. If that was a go all be all, then why are we not just keeping that test as the state standardized test and use it? So what needs to be revamped? If it wasn't a teach to the test, then again, my term, not the school's term or anyone else. If that wasn't the case, then why are we trying to revamp the test?
So, I 100% on what you just said, Chris. Governor Maura Healey, again, this is coming from WCVB.com. She opposed MCAS. She told reporters on Wednesday that the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education will further update regulations. It's time for us to continue what, frankly, was started before the election, which was to figure out the new path forward. I believe language speaks a lot. And if I go back to that ballot question, it did say MCAS, ending MCAS as a graduation requirement. It doesn't mean that Desi, Bessie, you name your person, can't come up with yet another test that doesn't have the MCAS name to it and say, okay, well, here's a new one.
Right. All they're going to do is, if they'll take the MCAS away, but it'll be MCAS 2.0.
Yep. Dress the pig in different clothes.
And of course, I'm not one who stays in political hype very long. So she was against it, but she never came out strongly opposed to it. And if, as governor, why did she not have Desi come up with something ahead of time, even before a vote were to come to fruition or before the ballot question came? She had the authority to direct Desi as governor to say, hey, I'm not in favor of this. We need to come up with something different. Let me, come up with something and show me what you got.
So I concur. Here's Brian's conniving mind. They have something, but they have to wait a little bit to make it look good. Like, oh, we didn't expect this, and then they're going to introduce some. You'll pardon me. It's kind of like the Patriot Act. It was all written out before. They just waited for the proper time to reveal it, and there it is. I think there is a plan. They're telling you they're going to have one, so I think they already have one.
Oh, we've heard rumblings about revamping MCAS anyway. So of course that's the political thing. Hey, this didn't go our way, so now let's show what we had and see if this comes up to be a little more palatable to the people and to the students.
So let's say there isn't one. Let's just go down the road that question 2 has passed. What would you think if 10th graders decided not to take the test this year?
Again, with it being taken away, and again, my opinion, with it being taken away as a graduation requirement, I wouldn't see a reason where a parent would opt out a child to take the test due to the fact that there's no punishment, nothing being held over them, nothing being held back. Again, it's a measure of what level these kids are learning at. So I'm not going to say that parents don't have that right, because we've always had that right. But I would have it. I'd be a little more pressed to understand why a parent would opt out a child when there's no repercussions of not passing it, and it's just a level of measurement.
You're correct. There are no repercussions about passing it, but there's no reason to take it. And if the school day is consumed with people taking these tests, then, and the kid doesn't want to take it, the parent is okay with the kid not taking it, why would they go to school? And then that brings up, would this be an excused absence or an unexcused absence, which matters if you are in 10th grade a lot more than if you are in 12th grade.
And again, it does matter, in my opinion, because again, I think judging a student's level is important. But I'll go back to when we were in school. We all had a standardized test, whether it was a state test, federal test, whatever it was. We always had and the schools, in your words, shut down for the testing period, because again, it was school has to be quiet. It's a quiet environment. Every grade level is taking this standardized test, and we want the kids to concentrate. So that was always in play. It just, because under the MCAS realm, it just became more pronounced as far as the, focusing of staff on here, because we have to do the testing for this grade as far as grade 10.
Yeah, I hear you. And back when we were taking whatever those tests were really called back in those days, I don't know that we had any advance warning that, this particular day we're going to take the test. We just, okay, here's the number 2 pencil and, start filling out the box. Chris Cotter is with us. He is a school committee member of the New Bedford School Committee. I'm going to switch gears and ask you a question that I asked the superintendent of Dartmouth schools. President-elect Trump is out to end wokeness in education, and you and I have certainly had our conversations about that. One of the comments released yesterday, and he may have said this other times, but I caught this part yesterday. Any school pushing critical race theory, transgender insanity, and other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content on our children will not be receiving any federal funds. On the campaign trail, he said he would not give 1 penny to schools with a vaccine or mask requirement. Your thoughts?
Well, I can tell you that you and I have had this discussion several times. The mask mandate, the vaccine mandate, I'm 100% against to begin with. As far as the DEI, again, I have asked the administration many times on this being something that is being taught in our schools under the realm of critical race theory. And I'm being told, and I have been told, that is not something that we are teaching in our curriculum. As far as inclusion and equity, I believe that all students, no matter what your race, no matter what your gender is, we need to be accepting. So I think that we do need to be inclusive. But I think the government has well overstepped their bounds on a lot of these issues. So I do hope that, we can get back to getting on a normal course.
Let me try it this way. And I know where you're coming from. There is a lot of this stuff under Donald Trump's eye and Brian's eye that are going on in not just New Bedford schools, but all schools here in all government schools in the Commonwealth. There's a lot of money to be lost here if he is going to be true to what he's saying. You're talking millions, certainly to the city of New Bedford, and possibly billions here in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, and with that being said, then, I would certainly be in favor of making sure, because, again, our district has a lot of need, and we do utilize a lot of government funding to assist our schools in our education process. So, if that's something that is going to be the removal, if that's something that is being taught in the schools, then I think that, we would need to comply, because we couldn't afford not to comply.
That's sad.
I totally agree with you, but I mean, I'm also one who has not been happy with the way that we've been utilizing government funding anyway.
Well, but how do you fix the problem if you're going to be a part of it?
Well, I don't think we've ever tried to fix the problem, to be honest with you. We've always gone along with the government push, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I'm not a Donald Trump fan. I don't think anybody's ever going to think that I am. But see, my way of doing it, I would just get the federal government out of it, and then you don't have to worry about what's DEI, and let your system do what it wants to do. And are there going to be people left out? Maybe so. But the federal government has no business. See, you're relying so much on the money now. They've got it's heroin. They've got you.
Oh, I wish I could disagree with you, but unfortunately, that's how our schools, and I'll just use Massachusetts or New Bedford as the one entity. We wouldn't be able to run our schools without the government funding because, again, the burden on the taxpayer would be overwhelming.
I got you. On that, I'm going to let you go. Ken Pittman is next. Chris Cotter has joined us. I'm Brian. We will do